Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack, back again to bring you my 10.1 Holy Priest Guide for Season 2 for Raids and Mythic Plus. With this video, we're going to talk about the talents, the builds that you're going to be going into and putting into practice, as well as some of the gameplay and how to be able to elevate your gameplay to the fullest for both raiding and M Plus content. And be sure to check out the different chapters down below to sort through whatever you like. And of course, if you're enjoying the content, be sure to check out our Patreon and make sure to subscribe as well. Starting up with our raid talent tree, and of course this string is linked in the description down below if you want to be able to check it out and import it for yourself. This is going to be more of the default build that Holy Priest is going with, and the spec is all about the holy words. If you're a little bit new to it, Serenity is going to be your primary single target holy word spell, with Sanctify being your more AoE focused spell, your bread and butter for your just overall healing. In a raid environment, you're putting together these talent builds to be able to optimize bringing your holy words back off cooldown through casting spells like Prayer of Healing, which bring your Sanctify back, but also through augmenting other spells to make sure that they're reducing the cooldown of these holy words, so you're able to get them back faster, regen more of them, and be able to pump more output as a result. There's been a couple changes going into 10.1, one of which was buffing up a talent called Healing Chorus, where your Renew Healing increases the healing done of your next circle of healing by 2%, stacking 50 times. You could have a double healing effect out of your circle of healing, which is pretty powerful. But at the same time, Prayer Circle works out really well because you're casting a decent amount of prayer healing for AoE output, and having a faster cast and a discount cost is also good. So these two are actually quite competitive. Same with Revitalizing Prayers, where your Prayer of Healing has a chance to leave renews. Also quite competitive with, after casting Sanctify, you have additional healing out of your Prayer of Healing. So you'll probably see a bit of variance with those two talents, but you'll always be speccing into Divine Hymn, which is your primary raid cooldown when you're raiding, as well as Holy Word Salvation, which is your second sort of raid cooldown that you have access to. This one is a 12-minute cooldown, which is reduced by casting more holy words. And with it in patch 10.1, you're pretty much getting it to like 3.5, maybe 4 minutes very consistently, because you're casting a massive amount of holy word spells over the course of your encounters. A lot of this is thanks to these prayer mending synergistic talents you see on the right side, namely things like Answered Prayers, which have a chance to gain Apotheosis for you off prayer mending bounces. Apotheosis is competing with Salvation. It gives you more holy word cooldown reduction, and it allows your holy words to be cast for free. With this, Harmonious Apparatus and Light of the Naru both give you more holy word cooldown regeneration in different ways, one of which is by making Apparatus, which turns your Circle of Healing and your Prayer of Mending, some of your very baseline and very efficient tools, into more cooldown reduction for your holy words. And Miracle Worker allows you to be able to hold 2 of those charges, so it makes it so that any time that you might be holding a holy word, you're not going to be wasting it because you're regenning the second charge. Which also means that you should always be very aggressive with using your holy words, and that you never really want to be holding on to them if there is raid-wide damage. After casting holy words, the new talent Divine Image, which was buffed repeatedly throughout 10.05, 10.7, is very competitive with Divine Word, but I would pretty much only use Divine Word if there was a specific moment in progression where you needed additional output, and using it as sort of like a mini cooldown with Sanctify to make your Blessed Healing Field to be able to help out your allies. It's sort of like a concentrated amount of output, whereas Divine Image, when you cast a Holy Word spell, you summon your Naru, it helps you and casts more friendly healing spells. Your primary utility is Symbol of Hope, where you're channeling it and you're reducing the cooldown of multiple different personal defensives for your allies. This is incredibly powerful, and I have a full list of abilities in my written guide, also linked in the description down below. When it comes to your class tree, there's a little bit of variance, and there's some times where you'll take some utility spells, but you'll pretty much always spec into PI. Master Spell is just kind of a decent routing to be able to get further down into the tree and take things like Power Word Life. And there's a lot of defensive resources with Light's Inspiration, making your defensive Desperate Prayer better, Improve Fade, which makes your Fade come back more rapidly. Bulwark's a decent defensive. There's a few different options there. And of course, you always want to take Sanguine Teachings because it's giving you lots of leech. When it comes to the tier set bonuses, Holy Priest has some banger tier sets. Their 2-piece is incredibly powerful, and you should work to get it as fast as you possibly can. I mentioned that there's a lot of prayer mending synergistic talent points that you're always going to be taking in Raids and Mythic Plus, and this 2-piece synergizes perfectly with it, because whenever you cast a holy word, cast a prayer of mending, you have a chance to send off an additional Prayer of Mending. A Prayer of Mending places a buff onto your ally, and then when that ally takes damage, it consumes one stack of the buff, and then bounces to another ally. And then when they take damage, heals them, consumes a buff, and consumes a stack of the buff, and then bounces to another ally. And it bounces a lot, which synergizes very well with our 4-piece, where whenever Prayer of Mending jumps or it expires, it increases the damage and healing of your next Holy Word by 4%, stacking up to 15 times. Since this set bonus synergizes, of course, with Prayer of Mending, it develops a lot of stacks very quickly, particularly in a raid. So you never really need to sit there and watch this buff tracker and see, oh, I have enough stacks, time to use this spell or that spell. Just always be setting Holy Word spells, always be hitting your Prayer of Mending, and you're going to be in great shape. You're going to be trying to get your 2-piece as fast as you possibly can, and it is a banger of a 2 and 4 set, even for M+. Now let's start talking about gameplay. Holy Priest, of course, is building towards a very AoE-oriented talent tree like we went over, but it also has a lot of variety with how you're able to utilize your spells. First and foremost, the most important thing to be utilizing for Holy Priest is Prayer of Mending. Through Prayer of Mending, everything else happens. So if you do not have like a weak aura or a reminder or a timer or a decent keybind that's very comfortable to press for Prayer of Mending, you need to do that. So much healing is going to be lost if you are not hitting Prayer of Mending on cooldown. Of course, there's a lot of times where there's not really any damage happening, or there's downtime, whether it's raids or Mythic Plus. You should always be prioritizing applying this to the tank or refreshing a debuff that might be about to expire. If you see a timer running out on like a 3-stack Prayer of Mending, cast a new Prayer of Mending onto the target. They'll then get a 10-stack because they receive +7, refreshes the timer, and then you'll be okay. But you must work on hitting Prayer of Mending on cooldown. It provides Holy Word synergy by proccing Apotheosis. The output is incredibly high. It's producing Echo of Light healing, which is your mastery, and it's producing Renew healing. There is so much output coming from it, and it is a massive error if you are not hitting it on cooldown. After that, make sure you're casting your Sanctify and your Serenity. Sanctify is your AoE, and it's a nice little cursor radius. So you want to make sure you're mousing over where you would like to be able to place it, dropping it in melee most of the time, and using it very aggressively. Serenities you can sometimes pool up if you know that there's areas where you might need to provide triage or single target spot healing to people who are taking heavy debuffs. There's a few different encounters, among them Rashok and Ziskarn in the new raid, which are going to require a decent amount of single target priority healing. Circle of Healing after that is also going to be a very high priority. Not only is it just very efficient healing with a lot of the talent options you have selected, but it also, if you talent into Prayer Circle, makes your Prayer of Healing more efficient. And you should always be looking to cast Prayer of Healing once you have that Prayer Circle buff up. Halo for just AoE damage, very efficient output. And then Powered Life, there's a number of weak auras. I have them linked in the description down below with my UI, which cause your raid frames to glow whenever a target drops below 35% health. Powered Life is insanely efficient for topping them back off in a very positive manner. Divine Hymn and Holy Word Salvation being your raid cooldowns, you should always look to be able to get these utilized multiple different times per fight. A lot of times, you'll get 2 casts out of Holy Word Salvation throughout an encounter, but you have to make sure that you're utilizing it early enough to be able to get it back in time. So working with your raid team and understanding that it'll be anywhere between a 3.5 minute and a 4 minute cooldown if you are being aggressive enough with your Holy Words, so that you can work that in with your fight timer. And of course, as we mentioned previously, Symbol of Hope should be used frequently. It's a 3-minute cooldown, gives mana back to your allies, and it resets the cooldown of all of their defensives, or one of their defensives each. For Holy Priest, it's Desperate Prayer, which is very nice to be able to have on hand. A lot of the common mistakes I see with Holy Priest players are not utilizing enough of their Holy Words and sort of holding on to them and casting Prayer of Healings instead, or trying to like pool them up for later for some sort of mechanic, and they end up missing a lot of Holy Words in the process. This is going to set you back and sort of lead to a domino effect where you're getting your Holy Word Salvation back later, and you're producing just a lot less efficient output, and so you're burning more mana and you're spending more mana, and possibly ooming yourself faster by casting less efficient abilities. So making sure that when you have Holy Words available, you're always looking for some sort of window to be able to utilize them very early and very frequently. When it comes to utilizing Prayer of Mending, it has a really long bounce radius. I think it's like 30 or 40 yards now. They changed it with 10.1. But I always try to make sure I'm casting Prayer of Mending off a target that's actively taking damage. More often than not, that means casting it onto the tanks, which means you're providing more tank healing in the process. But like I mentioned before, there's a number of raid boss fights that have single target ticking damage on priority allies, and so if you cast it on them, that's great, as long as you are starting the process of getting your Prayer of Mendings pushed out to your allies. That is going to be enough to be able to help you out. Some of the big challenges that Holy Priest has when it comes to raiding is a lot of movement, and there's a number of times where you need to be utilizing your mobile casts like Prayer of Mending and Circle of Healing and even your Holy Words to be able to cast while you're moving and adjusting your positioning. There's always going to be a lot of movement when it comes to raid encounters here and there. This raid is a lot more forgiving than the last one, thankfully, although we don't know quite about Sarkareth just yet. Could be a pain. And so when you're coordinating when to use your raid cooldowns, things like Divine Hymn should always be prioritized at moments where you have to stand still, whereas Salvation can be particularly useful for when you know that the raid is going to be running sort of all over the place. On like the Rashok intermission, there's going to be constant fire lines getting sort of spewed out all over the place, which makes it very hard to sit there for 5 seconds straight and channel. So that's a better area for Holy Word Salvation. Whereas when everybody's soaking sort of like meteor smashes, whether it's Rashok or Magmarax or any other encounter, where everyone's standing in the same place for a consistent period of time, Divine Hymn is wonderful to be able to slam down there as well. Mythic Plus talents are a bit different than you would see out of a raiding environment. From the class tree, you have certain things like Disease Dispels, where about half of the dungeons are going to need Disease Dispels, so you'll need to spec into that there. The Entangling Affix is going to be a snare effect, where using Phantasm and Fade will allow you to break yourself out of that immediately without having to run out. Dominate Mind works pretty well for a couple different humanoid mobs, particularly in the Vortex Pinnacle, where some of the casters will heal a lot. You can mind control them, hold them for 30 seconds, and let them be released on their own, and then your team can kill it later. You also are going to have to deal with the Incorporeal Affix, which is susceptible to hard crowd controls like Shackle Undead, and so you can easily cast Shackle Undead on them and not have to worry about them after that point. You also are going to need the Disease Dispel for the Afflicted Affix, and it's always recommended to have a mouse over macro for Purify so that you can just mouse over it, purify the Afflicted, and then move about your day. If you need to, you can also use Powered Life on it, which is especially helpful because they're at 0% health, meaning they take the extra bonus healing from Powered Life, and they're off to the races. Halo or Divine Star could be utilized in dungeons, depending on if you want more damage with D-Star or healing with Halo. It will not pull extra mobs, so don't worry about that. I always like having the Leech on hand for extra survivability, and of course, Power Infusion is excellent. Holy Nova and Rhapsody is sort of a luxury. You can get rid of these and start taking more defensive traits like Light's Inspiration or Fade, but it is very good extra damage if you have the talent points to invest in it. When it comes to the spec tree, you are going to be optimizing for some damage when you can afford it. So taking things like Imperial Blaze, so when you activate it, Holy Fire is available to be cast 3 times by incurring no cooldown and cast instantly. And most of the time, you're pretty much just going to dump 3 Holy Fires into whichever target has the most health. I am taking a lot of Prayer of Mending synergistic points, and that is because of the new 2-piece. So once you get the new 2-piece, which should happen pretty quickly with some of the tier changes they've made, you should feel very comfortable taking all of these talents that synergize with Prayer of Mending. And then your focus, and we'll talk about it a little more in the gameplay, is going to be on refreshing Prayer of Mending stacks onto your allies in preparation for difficult trash pulls and challenging boss fights. Your Prayer of Mendings are going to jump much more easily in this new season of Mythic Plus, which means they'll also be refreshed, but you do have to put a bit of extra work in as you micromanage them and make sure you're keeping these buffs on hand and sort of like storing healing on your allies for a later day. This also makes it a lot easier to take Burning Vehemence, which has been buffed a number of different times and is a very relevant damage spell, making your Holy Fire hit harder and making it cleave. So it's a lot easier to route through this. And you are sort of skipping a number of different raid talents like Divine Hymn and, of course, Enlightenment. So you might actually have to bring around a little bit of water in case you need to sip here or there. But a lot of your mana efficiency is going to come from good use of Lightweaver. Lightweaver causes your flash heal to build up a stack, which will reduce the cost and increase the healing of your next heal. When you cast a heal, it then consumes that stack. So you can hold 2 stacks, cast 2 heals back to back. You've then consumed 1 stack per cast. Divine Image, I love. It's just great damage and healing contributed. And of course, Harmonious Apparatus allows your Circle of Healing, your Prayer of Mending, and your Holy Fire to give you cooldown reduction for each of your respective words. And when you cast those words, you summon the Naru to be able to help you along the way. As I mentioned previously, a lot of Holy Priest M+ gameplay is focused around Lightweaver. So again, casting 1 Flash Heal builds up 1 stack of Lightweaver, and then spending that Lightweaver stack goes from 1 heal cast, consumes 1 stack. You can, again, build up multiple stacks, and you probably will through the Surge of Light on your class talents. It's just very important to make sure from a mana efficiency perspective and just kind of overall output to make sure that you are staying on top of spending those Lightweaver stacks, because you can not burn through your mana, but you'll pretty steadily find you have to be drinking more often. And if you're playing very efficiently, you'll find that you almost never have to drink when it comes to a dungeon environment. Prayer of Mending is a lot harder to be able to manipulate when you're in a dungeon environment, because sometimes they sort of like jump onto the same target and like double stack and potentially waste some stacks. But if you do it properly, where you're constantly casting Prayer of Mendings and constantly trying to getting them bouncing and getting them stacking up onto your allies, there's a number of times where you'll walk into boss encounters with so much passive stored healing that it's almost like having a second healer along for the ride to be able to assist you. Prayer of Mending historically has not been very good for dungeons, but when they linger for so long and when they can stack so highly, I often found that it was about 15 or 16% of my overall healing with Prayer of Mending when I was playing in PTR. On boss fights alone, it could be like 20 to 25% of my overall healing, or of my healing for that boss fight, because it is so much output that you are getting from this spell alone. So again, make sure you have a lot of emphasis on using Prayer of Mending. Sanctify, again, can be used on AoE healing, Serenity for single target, and again, you should always be aggressively spending these holy words. You'll be utilizing the Apotheosis talent when it comes to 5-mans, and so this cooldown is also going to immediately refresh the cooldown of both Holy Word Serenity, your single target, Sanctify, your AoE, and Chastise, your damage holy word. It also makes them free, so you should be ready to spend them immediately again, and then either spending Flash Heal or Heal to regen more Holy Word Serenities, to cast more Serenities, and be able to top off your allies more rapidly. D-Star Halo can be used on cooldown for damage and healing. Powered Life is wonderful for being able to top off low health allies, and if they hit that breakpoint, you should always be using it immediately. And again, Symbol of Hope is excellent for resetting your own defensive, but also for your tank's defensive. There's a lot of very useful tank cooldowns that are being reset or heavily reduced by something like Symbol of Hope, and so making sure you can track a tank's cooldowns that they're using with something like Omni CD, my profile is in the description down below, is only going to serve you well. You can also look at the list on my Wowhead guides, also linked below, which shows you exactly which ability each tank is having reduced for them. Some tank abilities like Ardent Defender are like a minute or less with some of the cooldown reduction they have. And so if you see a tank use Ardent Defender, you can then immediately slam down Symbol of Hope, allowing it to reset immediately for your tank. And then they have the ability, should they need it on difficult pulls, to be able to rely on that cooldown once again. It always helps to be able to communicate when you do it. And when you're getting into a damage environment, you always want to make sure, if possible, that you can have one of your Naru up by casting 1 Holy Word, at least. But keep in mind, additional Holy Words make your Naru even larger and more effective. So, before you cast your Imperial Blaze, try to have a Naru up already. You can use it with Chastise, Serenity, or Sanctify. Then, make sure you cast your Holy Fire first so it goes on cooldown. Hit Imperial Blaze, and then it'll allow you to cast 3 additional Holy Fires, focusing those spells into whichever target has the most health. If everything is fairly equal health, then you can just spread the Holy Fire dots around. The priority is on making sure that the Holy Fire dot actually does get some value. So you don't want to just sit there and only put it into one target and have 20-30 seconds of Holy Fire dot duration, and then the target dies early, and you don't cash in on that duration. D-Star is wonderful damage, and then you want to make sure that you're multi-dotting as much as you can with Shadow Word Pain. Holy Nova after that to be able to deal AoE damage, but you can also use it when you have maximum stacks of the Rhapsody talent, which is right below Holy Nova on the class tree, if you have it talented. I don't really recommend talenting into Shadow or Death, but if you have it, always try to use it within execute range, as it is good damage, but it's kind of a large amount of talent points to spend to be efficient with it, and so I'd recommend taking other options instead. For some of the more difficult boss fights that you're going to find in a Mythic Plus environment, it's always important to note where your largest output is going to come from and which targets are going to be taking the most damage. Since you're in a 5-man, you're really only able to whack-a-mole your allies. You're kind of sort of healing them one by one and sort of cleaving off onto them with some of your single target spells. So a lot of times it's very important to note that if a damage ability, like on Aberrus, where he's going to spam a large amount of AoE onto your allies, it's important to note if it's going to deal 80% of somebody's health over the entire duration of an ability, that if you just cast a Serenity onto one target at half health, that's going to be enough for them for the rest of the damage, and you should prioritize everybody else over them after that point. A lot of times, Sanctify is a decent instant heal, but it's not enough on its own to be able to carry the entire way. And a lot of times on large AoE damage, generally speaking, the tank is very safe if it's just on a boss fight. Aberrus, for example, just sits there and channels a spell, so you almost never need to heal the tank during that pulsing AoE, and all of your focus should be on healing your allies. Think about it like Hirja in Halls of Valor if you played Season 1. When you're in that storm bubble, your tank is in a very healthy position relative to everybody else, and you have a lot of time to make sure you top off the tank before the tank buster comes around. A lot of fights in Season 2 are very similar in that regard, and so making sure that you think about your own self-healing, which is helped by the leech talents that we're taking, and any other squishy people in your party are made a priority as you heal people sort of one by one, and then gently are sort of cleaving each other through Prayer of Mending healing and through the Trail of Light talent, which causes your flash heal or heal to also heal the last target that you had cast those abilities upon. Lastly, to wrap things up, Holy Priest should be focusing on crit and mastery as much as they possibly can in a raiding environment, and haste and versatility, or haste and crit when it comes to a Mythic Plus environment. You can always start using crafted rings or neck pieces to start jumping between your stats between raid and a Mythic Plus. And for trinkets, embellishment, crafting, all the rest, I have linked below in my Wowhead guides. At the time of this video on May 3rd, there's been a number of different changes to the crafting, so in case something changes, I would always advise you check out those written guides, as that's where I'll post updates as we get more information. Huge thank you to our patrons who are making this all possible. And big shout out to Zach, Thorreeker, Stefan, Simon, Ranger, Ralph, Milo, Merle, Kevro, Calderon, Julie, John, Fourth Crow, Dan, Eliv, and Cecil as well for all the support. If you would like to join them and help out the content and support, make sure you check it out in the description down below. Thank you so much for watching, guys. If you have any other questions, be sure to let me know in the comments below as well.